Hi, everyone. This is John with the Reluctant Tech Traveler. I'm here with attorney Bryan Porter. Bryan and I were classmates at the former school formerly known as T.C. Williams. And one of the reasons, Bryan, thank you for, the last time we talked actually was literally about 30 years ago. And I know you're a busy guy, so thank you very much for your time.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, so Bryan, I guess one of the things is that a lot of us are reaching our 50s now, and aside from sort of short posts on Facebook, we don't really get in contact with each other. So I kind of wanted to reach out just to all my friends on Facebook and just find out how they're doing. For myself, I guess I was just curious. We haven't talked in quite a long time. I know you're an attorney now. I guess my first question is, what was the road that led you? How did you end up where you are now? I mean, the last time we talked, we're at TC. What happened after TC and how did you end up where you are now?
Yeah, well, first of all, John, like I said, thank you. It's kind of, and I was very excited about talking to you, and it's kind of cool that you are reaching out to people. I think you reached out to my dad as well, if I'm not mistaken.
I
So,
did. I'm
um,
going to talk to Mr. Porter. He tells me to call him John, but I just have a hard time calling him John, so I still call him Mr. Porter. But yeah,
yeah,
I'll be talking to him hopefully
yeah,
pretty.
I have a hard time calling him anything other than Mr. Porter, even though he's my dad. But to answer your question, I went to college.
Where did you go to college?
Well, I went to Mary Washington to play baseball for a couple of years, but my grades kind of intervened and um, prohibited me from playing. And I didn't
Oh,
really like it there very much. So I transferred to Virginia Commonwealth down in Richmond, and I graduated from VCU. And I guess there's a lot that goes into your question about how I got to where I am right now. So I remember when I was at VCU, I took a
mhm.
pre-law class with a lawyer was the professor. His name was Professor Markham. And I remember he was an older gentleman, probably has passed away since I graduated, but he took me aside and he was a really nice guy and he saw something in me and he said, I remember him telling me, I think you would really be good at the legal profession. I really encourage you to consider going to law school when you get out of undergrad.
Wow.
And so I remember that. Um, but I also had gotten involved in politics. The state general assembly obviously meets in Richmond, the capital of Virginia, and I interned for an Alexandria delegate by the name of Marion Van Lanningham, and I worked at her office for about a year and a half, and I really enjoyed as a young person kind of the political thing. I was a political science major. And so when I got out of college, I stayed in Richmond and I worked for a state senator
Oh,
for
wow.
about yeah, I did that. But I'll be honest, John, I was pretty young and probably not mature enough for the amount of autonomy and self-starting that she pretty much expected. And I also, for some reason that I can't really explain, I had this real desire to become a police officer. So that's what I did. I started applying to police agencies and I got a job with the Metro Transit Police, which is the Metro Rail here in DC.
So you were a
And
cop. Wow.
I started there. I did that for about 2 years and I really wanted to be an Alexandria police officer. And so I transferred over and I was an Alexandria police officer for about 5 years, during which time I ended up deciding to go to law school. So I actually went to law school in the evenings at George Mason University School of Law, and then I worked the midnight shift as a police officer, and then I would sleep during the day. Um, and then I graduated from law school. I took the bar exam and I passed. And as a police officer, obviously, I had a lot of contact with the prosecutor's office here in Alexandria. It's where all of our cases went. And I had made a lot of contacts. And the then elected prosecutor for Alexandria, his name was Randy Single. He offered me a job, and so I went right from being a midnight patrol police officer to being an assistant prosecutor many years ago. And since then, I've made this office my career. I've been here now 23 years as a prosecutor. So I've been in law enforcement for about 30, uh, and I've been in this office for about 23.
Wow. So do you miss being a police officer or
Yeah, you know, on some level, the answer to that question is yes. I mean, I enjoyed that job. Um, I can't complain, obviously. I mean, my career has gone relatively well, and I think I've actually found a job that maximizes my strengths and minimizes my many weaknesses. But being a police officer was interesting. It brought a great deal of, I was pretty immature when I started the police academy. There were 20 people in my class. 19 of them had been in the military, and I was the only one that had just done college, right? So the joke was the rest of them were used to waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning and dressing for formation. And I
Mhm.
was used to going to bed at 6 o'clock in the morning because I had just gone to college, and I really think that that police job brought a lot of like discipline. Like I had to, shine my shoes and worry about my personal appearance and be on time for places. And then when you get out of that and you start actually being a police officer, obviously it's a very dynamic job and you've got a lot of autonomy and you're making there's a lot of decision making. But I will say that it's also kind of a young person's job, at least being in a uniform, because it's kind of crazy. I mean, you're working weekends, you're working midnights, you're working holidays. Obviously, it's a dangerous job. Even here in Alexandria, we've had officers severely injured over the years. And at some point, I remember like you start realizing how dangerous it actually is, and then kind of the fun starts to seep away from it a little bit.
I can
But I
imagine.
really enjoyed it. I think it was very important for me to do that. It was not easy to leave. And when I left, of course, I had been in a police car with, the ability to do basically go wherever I wanted. And all of a sudden I was wearing a suit and tie and was in a office setting. And it took me a while to kind of acclimate to that. But in the end, I miss it a little bit, but I think I probably made the right choice for me.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, though you mentioned the dangers. I mean, I guess I'm sure there's dangers of being like a prosecutor also, but I mean, like, I'm sure it's probably not the same as the dangers you would face as a police officer. So, I mean, I'm sure it,
Yeah, I mean, look, there are prosecutors every year that are kind of targeted for violence because of their decisions. I mean, some countries it can be really terrible. Like I was reading an article the other day about a guy who's a prosecutor, I believe him in Bolivia, and he's got an armed guard that takes him everywhere, right? So there's some personal danger in this job, and that we're obviously dealing with. Particularly at this point in my career, if I'm going to court, it's for a homicide, right? And so, you could definitely make some people angry. But policing's much more like in the moment, like you're there, you get called to a scene, you don't know exactly what you might be facing when you get there. And there's definitely a physical component to it of potential danger that normally you don't feel as a prosecutor. We're kind of divorced from that, kind of separated from that a little bit.
yeah. So, I guess, Brian, and I'm sorry if this is too personal a question, but I mean, are you able to, I mean, I still have nightmares when I was on jury duty. I was actually like I was on the jury and it was a homicide and I had to go through the evidence and I'm like, oh my God. I literally could not sleep for like weeks after that because it was just I mean, are you able to sort of cut yourself off from like work afterwards?
Yeah, I've gotten better at that, John. That's actually a very insightful question. And in fact, just today I was interviewing a young woman who applied for a job in my office to be a prosecutor. And she basically asked me like to tell her something about the job that, the TV and the movies don't really accurately depict. And the stress involved in it is definitely something they didn't teach me about in law school, right? So but to answer your question, I mean, when you start off, you're doing less serious cases. I remember back in 2005, I prosecuted my first murder trial. It was a very difficult case, and we got a conviction. But the apropos to your question, like I literally did not sleep for almost a week and a half. I mean, maybe an hour here and there. I didn't really eat. Obviously the stakes are very high, and that I sincerely believe that this guy had shot a friend of his in the back for basically no reason and killed him.
Ugh.
And you got a lot riding on that, right? I mean, if I don't secure the conviction, not only have I not done the victim justice or the family of the victim or the community that
Right.
justice, but the guy, feels like he can do what he wants to do with impunity and maybe hurt someone else, right? So that's a lot to put on your shoulders. And over the years, I've spent many sleepless nights worried about trials. I'd like to think that maybe the way my brain works, I get so amped up about that might help me in trial because I'm kind of going through all the various permutations that might occur. But I've gotten better with time. Maybe you get jaded. I mean, I've seen a lot of death and terrible things happen over the years. It still impacts me personally.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, but it's a very insightful question. And yeah, I mean, being a juror, that's for a homicide case. In fact, I actually, when I do a murder case, the jury is there. I actually kind of confront them about that, not in a negative way, but I'm like, hey, listen, this isn't a television show or a movie, right? Because over the years I've learned I've had jurors who said they wanted to sit on a murder trial. And then when they really got in the middle of it, they're like, holy crap, this is difficult. It's hard. Like, you've got
Yeah.
a dead person and you're talking about, a significant sentence for the guy if he is convicted. But on the other hand, we don't want to acquit somebody if they committed a murder. And it's got to be difficult for someone who does not do what I do to be asked to all of a sudden come in and be the arbiter of guilt or innocence for someone who's accused of doing something very, very serious.
Right. But do you think you are able to turn it off a little bit now and sleep
I've
better?
gotten better with time, John. So we've actually focused in my career, we didn't used to talk about employee wellness very much. Like, I mean, if I went to my boss in 2006 and said, "Hey, I'm stressed out and I don't have the right work-life balance," he probably would have been like, "Okay, well, get out of here. I'll get somebody who will try these cases." But we don't do that anymore. And one of the things we tell younger people, we do classes on employee wellness and how to manage stress. And we tell them, hey, find things that you can do outside of the courtroom to help relieve the stress. And for me, I still do a lot of physical exercise. I run a lot. I like to hike. But the two big things that I do to kind of help with this are one, I've played guitar for a very long time. I'm in a band.
I see it in the
Uh,
background, actually.
yeah, well, that one I very rarely pick up because I'm in the office right now. I don't want to bother everybody, but I got it here. And the second thing is that I got into sailing about 12 or 13 years ago. And so I've got a power boat here in Alexandria down on the river. And I also know how to sail boats. And I just went with a group of friends, all of whom are in law enforcement. And we went down to the British Virgin Islands and we rented a 50-foot catamaran. And I'm the captain. And we just sailed the boat around for a week and, had a great time, very relaxing to be out there. So, to answer your question, I think directly, yes, I'm to some extent I'm able to compartmentalize. Sometimes I still take the job home with me. I've gotten better with it over time, and part of that is coming up with coping mechanisms to kind of make sure that you can decompress and get out of the stressful rat race for a little bit.
Yeah, it's understandable. I think for myself, during COVID, I don't know if your dad told you my mom passed away, and so I mean I had to deal
Mhm.
with that
I'm
with
really sorry to hear that.
yeah, I mean it was pretty bad towards the end because she had dementia and like basically she was alone for almost 6 months with no one to talk. So, but yeah, I really had to compartmentalize that because I mean I had to basically try to switch it off when after she passed away because otherwise I think I wouldn't have been able to get anything done.
Yeah.
But I mean, is this the path that you always wanted to choose? Like when you were at TC at back then, what did you see yourself doing?
Well, it's funny, John. Like, you're a kid. I don't know if you really think about it too much. So it turns out in the end, I'm in law enforcement. I'm a lawyer, and I'm a politician to some extent.
Right.
I mean, I'm not. I mean, I got to run for office, but it's not like running for Congress or something. But it's still, it's an actual election. I'm in an election cycle now. But I look back on my, childhood. Even as a young man, there actually was when I was like in fifth grade, there was a law day competition in Alexandria. We went to the Lyceum down here on Washington Street, and I won an award. And I don't remember exactly what the award was for, but I remember I drew a poster of a lawyer, and it was a guy sitting at a desk, and it said that above and below I had written the words "lawyers help."
Really?
So that's a little interesting, right? I mean, you're like, I mean, I was 7, 8, 9, something like that. I mean, where did I get this idea that lawyers help? And I wrote, I drew this. I don't have the picture anymore, but I can picture it in my brain. It's a green piece of like poster board, and I had drawn this thing on there. So that's one part. I remember when I was at TC as a junior, I was in Miss Harmon's social studies class, and she got me a job interning as a high school student in my office, in the Commonwealth's attorney's office. So that's kind of weird. I was here in this very office suite when I was a junior in high school. Now, back then, the job, like they used the case management system was actually a card catalog, and my job was to like update stuff on card catalogs. I remember that. So that was a long time ago. And then I ran for SCA president at TC. I didn't win, but I ran for SCA president. So I guess there was something about politics
I
that
think I remember that
yeah,
actually.
I mean, so I guess there's some inkling as a kid that I kind of liked law and maybe politics. The law enforcement thing, it was actually later. My dad obviously knew a bunch of Alexandria police officers. He got me to do a ride along with an Alexandria officer when, he was still at TC. And I just really enjoyed that evening. So I guess in a way, it kind of all came together. But I can't tell you that when I was 15, I knew I wanted to be a prosecutor or something like that. It just was this vague idea that maybe being a lawyer would be something that I might be good at.
Hmm, interesting. So, yeah, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I mean, I think we were in different cliques, Brian. You were more with the cool kids. I think I hung out with the geeks more. So,
Well, that's arguable, but yeah, probably. I don't. Yeah, we were. You were 89 though, right?
I was 2 years ahead. I was 87 when I graduated.
Okay, that makes sense then. Okay, so that might be part of it too, John. It's just that we were, you were a little bit older than me.
But I do remember you walking around the hallways, and I mean, it seemed to me that you hung out with the cool kids because like you were always with the good looking girls and the good looking guys.
I
So, but
don't know. I mean, if I were able to get, I'm lucky I had any friends in high school since my dad was the principal.
I did that affect it? I mean, I never thought about that, but was that an issue like with you him making friends?
I mean, the good news is he was actually pretty well liked, to be honest, which is hard to do if you're the principal of a high school. So I don't think him being the principal didn't really affect me. I do think that I probably tried to be a little bit more funny and sarcastic toward in class and stuff than I probably should have been, maybe in an effort to prove that I was cool. I don't remember consciously thinking that, but it might have just been immaturity. But I remember being a little bit of a smart aleck in class, So, but it didn't really impact me negatively. I was a little nervous when I first went to TC because I had never been in a school where he was actually the principal.
Right.
But my parents offered me the opportunity to go to private school. They were like, if you want to go to private school, we'll find a way to pay for it if you don't want to be where your dad is. And I was, of course, my friends were all going to TC at that point, and I'm like, no, I want to go there. And
Right.
I don't regret that decision. It was, it worked out.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, not to really give a plug to your father, but he was actually one of the first people that I was able to sort of connect to it, quote unquote, as a friend. I mean, the other
Yep.
teachers, I don't even remember like Kokonis or
Yep.
Lieberman or whatever. I mean, those were teachers, but I couldn't imagine having a friendship relationship with them. They kind of terrified me. But your dad actually would show up in the store, and so I mean, he was actually one of the few people that I could see myself sort of chatting with. So yeah, I mean, it might have been an act, I don't know, but I mean, he did come across as pretty approachable, which was kind of
Yeah,
surprising.
no, he was and he is. I mean, it's funny. Like I go out with him. Like I had coffee with him yesterday at a local coffee shop, and he just chats everybody up, knows everybody. Now, there's a lot of people that remember him, and he might not remember their names because he's had so many students that went through TC.
Mhm.
But he usually remembers them. He'll say the year. He'll be like she was the class of '93 or whatever, as opposed to necessarily the name. So he's still well known and he's still active. He still works for. I mean, he's retired, but he works for the school system and he does on contract basis. He does like principal selection processes for them,
Oh,
like
wow.
interview processes. So he's still very active, and my parents still live in the same house right up Oak Street, right around from the
Wow.
store.
Yeah, it's I kind of miss Alexandria. For what it's worth, I mean, after TC, I went to Chicago and then I moved to California, and that was sort of at that point, it was the late 90s, and then so I was working for a .com, and they sent me out to Japan, and so then I was out in Japan for a while, and I really loved it. But in Japan, that's when the .com bust happened. I don't know if you
Yep.
remember, it was like the early 2000s, so I got
Oh
axed.
yeah.
And so I ended up getting a ton of cash and I was stuck in Tokyo. So I ended up staying there. And so I was there for like the next 10 years. And so it was kind of strange. I mean, how life worked out. I grew up in America and my parents thought, having an American life would be easier. But then, yeah, I ended up going back to Asia. So it was kind of strange. But that
That's
was,
interesting.
yeah.
So what you're in California right now though?
At the moment, I'm in Ohio. So actually,
Okay.
I'm here to take care of some stuff. My parents, well, my dad died a little while back. I think and my mom just passed away in 2022. So I'm here
Yep.
to basically sort of take care of some stuff with him and with my brother also. My brother's living out here. And so my parents, when they
Okay.
retired and they sold the store, they actually moved out here to be with my brother. So,
Okay.
but ironically enough, I mean, they love being in Alexandria. And when I go back, like a lot of my memories are there. I kind of, the Grape and Bean is where the store is now, and I'm sorry
Oh
to
yeah.
offend people, but it's hard for me to see that anything else. And it's
Well, it's still, I mean,
not.
they put like a little porch on it, but it still has the footprint of the store, right? And I don't go in there very frequently because I live in Old Town, but obviously my parents are right there, right? So I have met my mom, for happy hour once or twice there. So it's a little weird. I remember the store really well. I remember your parents very well. I was down there 3 or 4 times a week when I was a kid.
Yeah. So so Brian, I mean, I guess and I asked this question to all my friends. I mean, if you could talk to 20-year-old Brian, if you could do it all over again, would you do anything different? Um,
Sure. I think I mean there's all sorts of funny answers to that, right? Like
but big picture wise, would you?
yeah, yeah. I mean, but I think the reality of it is that when you're younger, at least it was true for me. Um, I didn't really have a plan. I didn't really know other than maybe just kind of vaguely going to college and trying
And
to
being a
have
lawyer?
good time, maybe vaguely being a lawyer. I didn't really have a plan, and I don't think young people should like completely, meticulously plan out their entire life. But I think I would have preferred when I were younger, if I'd had a better idea of like, I don't want to sound, over the top with this, but life is a pretty precious gift, right? And
I
you're
don't
young,
think
you don't
that's so
really
over the
understand.
top.
Yeah,
That's so,
you don't think like that, right? You don't think like you're just like, I'm here, I'm going to wake up, and every day, and as you get older, you start thinking, well, you got to really appreciate it. And I'll give you a great example, John. One of my regrets in life is, I think, I went to VCU, which is a great college, nothing wrong with it, good university. But if I had just applied myself in high school a little bit, I think I was intelligent enough that I could have gone to a much better college, right? But it just never even really crossed my mind or registered with me. I did okay in high school. I didn't have to try very hard and I got B's. But when it was time to apply to college, it wasn't good enough to get into any of the really good schools, right? And so I
Mm.
kind of just went with the flow. So I think if I had the ability to go back and talk to a 20-year-old Brian, I think I would just say, hey, listen, man, life's a precious gift. You shouldn't take anything for granted. Every day is another opportunity to do something positive. And maybe you need to put a little bit of thought into what you want your life to look like. Now, maybe by luck, it's turned out okay for me. I've got nothing really to complain about. I mean, I'm blessed in a lot of different ways, but I think I might have been able, to kind of think about what I wanted to do. So, for example, one of the things that I was really impressed with, you just shared this with me. I'm 54 now. I have never, I mean, I've lived around a little bit and I've traveled a lot, but you lived in Tokyo for a decade, right? Like I kind of look back on my life and I'm like, I never really have moved away from Alexandria. And there's some benefits to that. But I hope that before I pass away, that I get a chance to live somewhere else and kind of see a different part of the world a little bit. So,
Where would you want to live, Brian?
you know, I really like,
Let's, and I ask this to all my friends. It's one of my favorite questions. If you hit the lottery and you never have to worry about money, just
yeah.
really hypothetically, where would you want to go?
Well, it's interesting. Like, I definitely would like to spend part of my time in the Caribbean. I really love that vibe, and I love boats and water and swimming and all that stuff. But I don't know if I'd want to live there 12 months out of the year. I
Hmm.
could see like splitting my time there. I think I'm kind of an urban guy. I could see myself maybe like either I've never been there, but I'd like to try Australia, see what it's like down there, or maybe if I could split the year, maybe somewhere like a cool European capital, like I'm thinking like or city like Vienna or Zurich or something like that. I mean, I could see me half the year there and half the year in the Caribbean. That would kind of be a great split for me.
That's pretty cool.
Hmm.
Yeah, interesting. Um, I think that, well, definitely go to Australia. I mean, I've never lived there, but I've traveled there on work a couple times, and it is fantastic. And then I've never been to Vienna, but I mean, Europe, have you been like, oh, Europe is also fantastic, so you should
I've
definitely.
never been to Vienna. I've been to a bunch of different places over there, but I've never been to Vienna. But I've heard wonderful things about it, so got to
Yeah.
put that on the list too.
Yeah. And I guess you mentioned like talking to 20-year-old Brian, and I guess I'm almost scared to ask this since a lot of our friends have kids now, but what do you think of the current culture? I mean, I don't have kids right now, Brian, but I mean, I'm 55 or oh God, I'm almost 56, but I mean, and maybe this is a pipe dream. I still kind of want to have kids, but I'm terrified because I just think kids now are so addicted to phones and social media and all that. I mean,
Well,
like
that's true.
what do you think of the current kid culture?
Well, I don't have kids either, so maybe on some level I'm not qualified. On the other hand, I see a lot of it. I see a lot of it because unfortunately there are kids that come before my office, usually not for very serious things, but look, I think every generation has its challenges. I'm probably on some level, John, my parents kind of felt the same way about the Nintendo console that we had, or the Atari console that I had, or ColecoVision, whatever it was. But it is true that those things were not as completely invasive as social media and cell phone culture is now, right? I mean, yes, I would come home in the afternoon and play video games for an hour, but it was like 1 hour and that was it.
Right.
And then I was out and you weren't carrying around, the computer with you and constantly worried about what you were posting. So I do worry about it. I worry about, I mean, you're a kid, right? So I think about all the dumb things I did as a kid. If you're a kid, you don't know any better. You post yourself doing something really stupid on the internet, you can never get rid of it, right?
Yeah.
So I think the culture is a little bit of a problem. I hate to say it because I sound like a crotchety old man, but I do
Oh,
fear that the internet might be the downfall of society at some point. I mean, it's really allowing people with extreme views who, 30 years ago would have been a lone wolf in the woods, they can now attract like-minded people on the internet and kind of like just the sheer numbers can collectively add to their unusual viewpoints. I prosecuted people like that for murder. There's a guy who all he did was spend all day trolling the internet and saying terrible things about human beings. So I do worry about it. I worry about the culture. Um, I assume probably we'll find a way to adapt with time, but kids do spend an awful lot of time on social media, a lot of time worrying about how many likes they've gotten on their posts, and I'm not sure that's healthy.
yeah. I mean, I only bring that up because it just seems that I don't know. And you said you're a crotchety old man. Maybe I agree, maybe I am also. But I mean, I just think that kids now just don't seem to be as adventurous as we used to be. I mean, like I won't name names, but I know a lot of kids, and even in Alexandria, of my classmates now, and they always like go out with their friends. And when they go to college, they always go to the colleges that their friends are going to. That they always kind of like I asked them once, why don't you want to go someplace different and meet new people? And they're like, oh no, no, people are dangerous. And so it just seems like kind of that the kind of the autonomy or sort of the adventure spirit kind of is gone now. I think kids, like you said, they kind of want to stay in their own groups, which is kind of sad.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's true. And I definitely, I mean, look, we're all guilty of it on some level where you're just kind of addicted to your phone. Like, I mean, I try really hard to put the phone down, and I do for significant. I mean, I'm better than a lot of people, mostly because I consciously try to think about it. But I wasn't raised in that culture, right? If you're 15, 16 years old, that's all you know,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I can still vaguely, I'm sure you can't do, vaguely remember the time before cell phones.
I think we're the last generation before
Yeah.
cell phones, so unfortunately. So,
Yeah, when I went to college, we did not have cell phones, but by the time I started at the transit police, that was 95. I had a phone. Now, it was the old Nokia telescoping like antenna, and it didn't work very well. And then you fast forward 10 years and the iPhone comes out, right? So you're definitely right. We're the last generation that probably can remember a time before the ubiquitous cell phone situation.
and social media and all that other stuff. So,
Hmm.
yeah. So, but I mean, well, but I'm glad you have some hobbies. I mean, aside from boats and guitars, I mean, you're able to relax now. And I mean,
Yeah, well, you get to a point. It's funny when you're young, you've got like when it comes to like traveling, you got more less responsibility and more freedom, but you don't have any money really, and you got to have money to travel. So, but now, I mean, the good news is because I'm in charge of the office. I mean, I got to obviously it's a serious job, and I've got to be here and run the office, but I've worked here so long, I have plenty of leave. And so I try to travel also, like even if it's not great travel, like I'm trying to think.
are you able to work remotely? I mean, you probably can if you have a court appearance, but I mean,
Yeah, it's not really a remote situation, just because we have to physically be in court. And I don't go to court that much anymore, just the nature of my job. My office is pretty big. I've got like 50 employees. It's grown a lot over the last couple of years. So I'm in charge of what amounts to a pretty big law firm, right? So I mean, the last time I actually tried a case was a year and a half ago. We had a big
mhm.
murder case, and I actually went to court on that. But most of my job is philosophy, running the office. I'm pretty involved in the state general assembly still. I go down there a lot. So, but yeah, I travel, and I try to come up. I always try to have some trip on the calendar, right? So I have something to look forward to, even if it's not. I'll give you an example. I'm going with my girlfriend. We're going to Charleston, South Carolina for
Oh,
the
nice.
Easter week. She's got family down there, right? So that's not a huge trip. It's an hour in the air from Reagan National,
Hmm.
but at least it's on the calendar and I know I'm going,
Right.
right? And she and I are going to New York to Manhattan next weekend. And that's on a train. So it's not necessarily the best in the world and it's only for one night, but it's something to look forward to, right? So I try
It
to
is.
have little trips, and then I try to plan one or two big trips a year. We just got back from that one in the Virgin Islands,
The
and
sailing
that
trip.
helps a
Yeah.
lot. Because I will say this: when I got on the boat, I told my office, I'm like, listen, I unless it's
Don't
a
call you,
real
right?
emergency, I'm don't email me, don't I'm not looking at emails, and I'm not answering the phone. Um, for large portions of time, the phone didn't even work because I mean we had Wi-Fi on the boat, but when you're in the middle of the ocean, it doesn't work.
Hmm.
So it was really a chance, one of those rare opportunities for me to kind of completely decompress and not be beholden to this thing, right? Because it wouldn't work. Um,
Were you successful? Like, did they not get a hold of you or?
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's funny. This sounds terrible. I was like, listen, unless if it's a real emergency, you can call the company that owns the boat and they can radio us, because they'll have radio contact with us and they can
Mhm.
say, hey, you need to call your office. I'm like,
Office?
but a real emergency is not a normal murder. It's got to be something really terrible before it's an emergency because there's nothing I can do in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, right? So, yes, for the most part, I was able.
For the
I did
most
not.
part.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I first got there, we were at a resort, and I looked at a couple of emails. But when I was on the boat, I didn't look at it. And when I got back, which was just last week, I had, several thousand emails. I mean, most of them were nonsense, but that took a while to get through. But I think it's important as you were saying about kind of keeping your sanity. to divorce from the phone, divorce from the emails, divorce from work from a little bit. And that was really good for me. That was very helpful.
Yeah. Brian, your job is a lot harder than mine. I deal with machine. I'm an IT guy, so I mean, I can turn a computer off, but you deal with people. It's a lot harder to like detach from people than it is from machines. So,
I think everybody has their, there's probably things about your profession that I would find very difficult, right? I mean, it's just everybody kind of hopefully finds something that they're good at and that they at least enjoy most of the time. And I like dealing with people. I mean, that's probably the hardest part of my job, John, is like I'm effectively my own HR department, right? So I have to deal with difficult employees, and I've had to fire people over the years.
oh God, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the easiest thing, but I've gotten better at that over time too. So it could be, but also, like I really enjoy teaching younger people. I'd like to think I'm pretty good at trying homicide case now. And so I don't do a lot of it, but I'll have young people ask for an hour of my time and they'll come in and, I can kind of give them my philosophy on it and the things that I've learned. And so I enjoy all of that. Right. So there's some benefit to dealing with people. There's some drawbacks as well, but you got to take the good with the bad, right?
Yeah, definitely. So your day, you don't do that many court trials now, so you're mostly managing people. I mean, I guess why
Yeah.
stop missing police work? Do you miss being in the courtroom?
No, it's funny. That's a really good question. So, one of the reasons why I chose this profession, I mean, at the very beginning, I seriously considered going back to policing because I just was I think I was chafing at you're in an office and you got a set schedule and all that, and you got to wear a suit. But I tried a jury trial a long time ago, the first one I ever did, and I really enjoyed it. And I remember thinking like, wow, like that was interesting and fun, and I was good at it,
Hmm.
right? So I do, I'm not high on myself. In fact, I'm super critical, but I do have some innate ability to like try a case, and it's something about being able to connect with people. I mean, a lot of what we do is kind of like acting in a way. I mean, there are real emotions at play, and it's a really serious situation when you're dealing with a homicide, but you're still putting on a performance, if you will, doing argument in front of a jury of strangers.
To try to convince them.
Um, yeah, you got to convince them. You got to be persuasive, right? And you got to tell them, you got to make them believe that you believe. And the good news is that's pretty easy to do when it's a murder, because obviously I do believe in the case. So I enjoy it. I think I've got some natural capability for it. And then with time, having tried a lot of cases, I've gotten better. But I got to be honest, if I were, I'm sure I'll try another case. Like I'm not done yet. It just probably be a couple of more murders before I actually retire. Actually being in the courtroom, that part I miss. What I don't miss is the prep. The preparation is very, very difficult. And the, um, it's not just like the academic part of it, sitting down and like figuring out the rules of evidence and what your case is going to look like. And a lot of it's the human element of it. So I'll give you an example. The last murder that I tried, the victim unfortunately was a Down syndrome woman,
Oh,
and her
wow.
family had they wanted her to have as normal of a life as possible. So when she turned 21, they got her an apartment, and she lived, I can't say she lived independently, right? She lived semi-independently.
Right.
And they took care of her, and they would call her in the morning to make sure she took care of her basic needs, and they would go over there frequently. But unfortunately, obviously, somebody preyed on her and killed her. And you think about the human element there. I mean, that kind of case really sticks with you, right? And so dealing with the fact that someone would prey on who was not Down syndrome would prey on someone who is, and this guy actually kind of stalked her and made her like it wasn't it was planned out to some extent. That's a terrible thing to deal with, and then you got to live with knowing what happened to her. And then I got to know her family very well, right? And they're wonderful people who were trying their best to give her some kind of modicum of a normal life, and it obviously did not go the way they wanted it, and so that's really sad. And she went to a special school, and so her teachers were very involved. They all knew her, and they came, and lots of emotional conversations with them. So the benefit of my job is that when something terrible happens, we get to do something about it, right?
Right.
And the benefit of my job is that we have to, to some extent, if we do it correctly, there's some nobility in giving voice to a voiceless victim, right? On the other
Yeah, I can see
hand,
that.
yeah, but this is something I tell victims when I deal with them. I'm like, listen, the biggest poverty of my job, the biggest downside is we come in after something bad has happened, right? We're very reactive in my
Mhm.
office. And when I'm dealing with a murder, I've got the family there. I mean, it's absolutely impossible for me to make things right. The only way I can make it right is if I could go back in time and stop.
And stop the murder. Yeah.
Right. And I can't do that. So no matter what I do, I cannot give the victim's family what they really want, which is their loved one back. I can make a difference to them. I can make them feel like I care. I'm not make them feel, show them that I care. I can do justice by the victim. And if I'm fortunate enough to get a conviction, maybe I can stop this guy from doing it to somebody else in the future, but I can't really make it right. So I guess that's a long way of answering your question. When I'm in the courtroom, yes, I missed that kind of like headbutting, mano a mano, like skull game where I'm trying to outwit the defense and make sure that I can persuade the jury. But it's a very they don't really portray that in the TV and the movies very well. It's a very emotionally taxing and invested situation when you're doing high risk
Yeah.
criminal trials, right? So I don't really miss it. And I've looked at learning HR and leadership, and like I didn't really have any training on that. I've kind of looked at that as like a new phase of my career, and I'm learning new skills. And I made a lot of mistakes when I first got elected. No one had ever told me anything about being in charge of an office. I had just been a trial attorney, and so I try really hard to learn from my mistakes, and I think I've become a much better leader and a much better supervisor over the decade that I've been in office. And so that's kind of what I'm formulating or what I'm trying to look forward to in the future is improving those skills and kind of imparting some of the knowledge that some of the wisdom I've hopefully learned over the years to younger people.
Yeah. I mean, I can see you said you don't miss the prep work. I can see the prep work being excruciating because you basically have to set up a story. You mentioned convincing the jury, so you probably have
Mhm.
to make sure, like you said, it's kind of a performance. You have to make sure the script is correct, I suppose.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of moving parts. I mean, nowadays, I mean, you probably as an IT guy will appreciate some of this. I mean, over the arc of my career, the manner in which we put together criminal cases has changed completely. When I started doing murders, almost every murder I had was the evidence was primarily eyewitness testimony that saw all or parts of what had occurred,
Hmm.
right? And that's got its own problems. People sometimes forget things. Sometimes they intentionally forget things. Sometimes they don't come to court. Sometimes they were drunk at the time that they observed what they supposedly observed, right? So you got all these problems. With time, technology has really become a huge part of what we do, and at the very beginning it was cell phones. Okay, we started using cell phones, and mostly what we were using back then was cell site activations to kind of plot where people's cell phones had been in time and try to put them
Location
close
tracking.
to
Yeah.
a crime, right? Like historical cell phone tracking. Then it became content as people texted more, right?
Right.
And then it became, videos that people were posting on Instagram and the data from their Apple Watch, all sorts of stuff. And it's constantly morphing and changing. And over the past couple of years, video has become more and more not just video that people take with their phones and post to the internet, but surveillance video, ring cameras, right? And cameras are much more ubiquitous now. And there's some civil liberty questions about cameras, but from my perspective, a camera is much better than an eyewitness because whatever's on the video is on the video, right?
Right.
So things are a lot more complicated. A murder case now where we used to be able to get them done in a couple of days. I mean, it can easily take 2 or 3 weeks now with all of the evidence that we have to move in. And obviously, the more technical it is I've had to learn an awful lot about computers and cell phones And I'm not professing to be any kind of expert, but I know a lot more than a layperson now, just because you have to in order to be able to talk cogently about it in the courtroom, right? So it's rewarding, but it's complicated.
I can imagine. I'm sorry, and I have to ask this, like that person that unfortunately killed the Down syndrome's girl, was there a reason that he did it? Like, I'm just curious. Like,
Yeah, it was, well, unfortunately, it was a sexual assault.
oh,
He,
jeez.
yeah,
Okay.
we had him on video. Basically, I mean, she clearly was, disabled, and I think unfortunately, there are people in the world who see a weak target and decided, I don't know how much he planned it out, but we had him on video outside of the apartment complex, basically watching her the day before and following her
Oh
around.
God.
So it was really, really, really terrible. It's a very terrible situation. And the good news is he was convicted, and actually just 3 days ago, we got word from the Court of Appeals that his appeal had been denied by the appellate court. So he's going to remain incarcerated, and he got a life sentence, which is
Okay.
good because people like him are compelled to do this stuff, right? It's a compulsion, and I fear that if he were ever out again, he'd probably do it to somebody else.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Brian. That just, I mean, I'm glad you got the conviction, but yeah, it must have been excruciating going through
Yeah,
that.
that was definitely one of those. I mean, every murder is terrible, right? I mean, but a case like that with a absolutely innocent victim, who it's terrible, John. It's really, really bad. So as I was saying, that's both the benefit and the curse of my job. The benefit is I got to do something about it. I can look back with some satisfaction and say, hey, my brain, coupled with some other people that were working the case with me, we were able to secure a conviction, a very
Get this
complicated
guy.
case with a
Yeah.
lot of evidence. But the bad part of it is, I look back on that case, I can't, I didn't make it better. I didn't fix it, right? I did the best we could as human beings to try to pick the pieces together and stop him from hurting anyone else.
Well, I
But
mean, I guess not to sound like just, but I mean, you did get the victims as much as you could. I mean, obviously,
yes,
you couldn't bring the person back, of course, but I mean, with what we have, you probably did the best you could. So, yeah.
that part I agree with. And that's what I've got to be satisfied with because that's all I can do,
Yeah.
definitely.
So, all right. So, Brian, I mean, you mentioned retirement. Is that coming up for you, or is it,
Well, so I'm running for reelection this year. And
you're
if
only
I get
54, man. You're still young.
yeah, well, I mean, I've got some, well, I'd like to do something different if I can make it work. So there are actually, I've got some possibilities in the podcast world. I just did a podcast on a case I did, another murder case I did with a guy who is a host of a well-known true crime podcast. So he and I are working on some opportunities.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. He was actually a police officer at one point, and he became um, a media. I mean, he's got his own media production company in New York, in Manhattan. So I'm working with him. I mean, nothing's come of that yet. So I'm working on maybe breaking the paradigm a little bit and trying to do something different in my next chapter. But if I do one more term, it's a 4-year term. I'd be 57/58 at the end of the term, and I'd have 30 years. So I would have the number of years necessary for a pension.
Retirement.
But I don't plan on retiring and not doing anything. And also, 4 years goes pretty quick, John, as you know. I mean, 4 years from now, I might think to myself, well, I still like my job, and so I guess what I'm saying is I'm keeping the options open, but it's not a definite plan yet. My only definite plan is to hopefully get reelected this year and do another term, and then we'll see where
I'm
we're at
pretty
in a
sure
couple
you
of
will,
years.
Brian. So
Yeah.
I do, I mean, this is something that's universal, but I mean, like I remember back in like fourth or fifth grade, a year was just this unimaginable length of
Oh
time.
yes.
Around
Hmm.
around seventh grade at GW, that's when it just felt like it started getting faster. And then after TC, a year just flew by. So I don't know why the perception of time changes so much as we get older. But
I don't know, but I definitely agree with that. Like 100% completely agree with that assessment. The only thing I would say is I think it took me a little bit longer to start really noticing the passage of time. But it does seem to get worse every year. Well, maybe not worse, might not be the right, but more
faster.
obvious.
Yeah.
year. You just kind of figure it out and you're like, wow, I think back to like last February, it seems like it was yesterday. So that's definitely a real thing. The other thing I've noticed as I've gotten older, this might not, if depending on where you live, maybe you haven't experienced this, but I really hate the winter in a way that I didn't used to. Like when it gets to be like November and the days are getting really, really short with daylight savings time, and I know the cold is coming. I'm like, man, this stinks. I don't know if I can keep doing this.
Yeah, I remember, and then I remember DC like in December, and I mean, or Alexandria, and so when the snow is there and everything is dark, it is kind of depressing. Even though I still love Old Town, but yes, it is kind of depressing and when it's dark and dreary.
Yeah, I love it. I just once again, if I can't live in Vienna and the Caribbean, maybe I could do like a condo in Florida and come to Alexandria for 6 months, and then when it gets cold, I can move to Florida or something. I don't know.
Yeah, so okay. I mean,
So do you ever get? I mean, you said you occasionally come here, right?
I do. I do come here. Usually it's for work, so I do have a couple of clients. I mean, I'm just a consultant, so I mean, I travel around and I go to computer sites and I fix stuff. So I did have a client in DC. I haven't been there in about 3 or 4 years, but I did come there. I probably will go there this year, Brian. So definitely I'll look you up and we can try to take a coffee or take a beer or
Yeah,
something.
man. If you just let me know when you're coming, I'm around. I mean, I would love to catch up, and heck, I
Cool.
can invite my dad too. He can come by and
Yeah,
say
that would be
hi.
great. So Brian, thanks for your time. Last question, man. I have to ask you. So being a prosecutor, are any of those shows like Law and Order accurate, or you think they're totally not accurate? Like,
Well, I mean, I'll be honest, John. Like that's one of the constant pet peeves of people in my
so
business,
no, they're not.
because they're not really. I mean, Law and Order is probably the closest, but I don't want to make it seem like it's super close. And when we do jury trials, like I have to disabuse people of that notion, right? I'm like, hey, listen, this is not easily packaged in 45 minutes and the whole case is solved, right? I mean, this is the real world, right? So, and some of them are ridiculous. I mean, most of them are just out to lunch, but I think Law and Order is pretty close. That's probably the best one out of all of them, you
Really?
know?
Okay.
Yeah. So that's it. And then, hey, I wanted before you get off, I wanted to share this with you because I was my dad had mentioned to me that he thought you were going to be talking to him, and
Yes.
I was thinking about this. This is a memory, and that's interesting. My dad does not remember this, but it has to do with your dad.
Okay.
So when I was a kid, I mean, I must have been 10 years old, something like that. I took a pack of football cards from your dad's store without paying for them. And I went back to my parents' house and my dad figured it out. And my dad grabbed me and walked me back down to the store and made me confront your dad basically and confess what I had done.
Really?
Yeah, it's a true story. My dad doesn't remember this, but of course I was little and it made a big impact on me. In fact, maybe your dad and my dad scared me onto the straight track so that I could end up being in
Be
law
a
enforcement.
lawyer.
But your dad was so kind to me. Like, I mean, he was upset, and I think he was, in retrospect, now that I'm older, I think he was intentionally acting like really unhappy with me and disappointed to teach me a lesson.
Uh-huh.
But he was also very kind, and I always remember that. I mean, like it did impact me, and I still remember. But I brought that story up to my dad a couple of days ago, and he doesn't remember it at all. And I'm like,
Uh,
well, it definitely happened. I mean, I can remember the pack of football cards in my hand. It was a Topps pack. I remember that.
wow.
So in a way, when you reached out, that kind of popped up in my brain, and I hadn't really thought about it probably in maybe 40 years,
Okay.
but I'll always remember that day. And your dad was very kind to me, but he also gave me the appropriate level of being
Angry.
upset and angry so that I learned a lesson from it.
Okay. Brian, my father actually really loved your dad, and actually he said, I mean, before he passed away, he had nothing but nice things to say
Well,
about
that's very kind. Thank
you.
you.
So, I mean, there were definitely, like, he definitely had public enemies. Like there were people that he just feuded with at the West Hunt Market, but you were not one of them. So,
Well, that's great.
yeah, there were a couple kids that, like that they would tell me, John, I have the record of being thrown out of your dad's store. And so,
Yeah, that's funny.
yeah,
I really appreciate you reaching out, man. I mean, I would definitely have really enjoyed talking to you, and I'd be more than happy if you come this way. No pressure, but if it works for your schedule, let me know. I won't take you to Grape and Bean. We'll go get a cup of coffee somewhere else, okay?
Yeah, that sounds great. Brian, thank you so much for your time, sir. And then it was lovely. It was wonderful to talk to you.
Yeah, it was really nice talking to you. And if I can do anything else for you, you know how to get in contact with me. Just give me a message and we'll get back in touch, okay?
All right. Thanks for your time, man. Talk to you
Okay,
soon.
see you later, John. It's nice talking to you. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Cheers. Bye.